Hi, I'm Logan Toon. I am the Director of Evaluation and Assessment here at the school district. And I was asked a little while ago by the Technology Committee to do a program evaluation for Pearson's ILS Success Maker program. The contract has expired, and we have the option of renewing that contract at a cost of $300,000 for the school district. And with a price tag that heavy in the economic environment that we're in right now, it became important to make sure that we're attaining the level of benefit from the software that we think we are. And so they asked me to put together some numbers and look at some data, and I had some people on my staff help me out on that. And so this is to just kind of summarize the findings of the program evaluation that was conducted for Pearson's Success Maker program. One of the key things in a program evaluation is to determine whether or not the program is being implemented the way it was intended to. And though it's impossible to get into every classroom and find out exactly what's going on and how ILS is being used, we have a couple of indicators of implementation. One of the indicators that we have is the amount of time students spend using the software. The software developers have recommended a certain number of minutes in order for a student to be deemed as having had the full ILS experience. And in our school district in reading, we had about 27% of our students in the last academic school year engage in the full ILS recommended number of minutes, and about 41% of our students in math had the full ILS experience. Another indicator of implementation is whether students are engaging in coursework that's in response to some diagnosed instructional need. And so one of the indicators of that is whether students have been enrolled in and are participating in an ILS course that's been customized by their teacher. And 3% of our students in both reading and mathematics are engaging in custom courses. And so looking at these indicators, it appears that the majority of our students are not experiencing a customized, instructionally responsive program in ILS. Some of our students are using ILS, but they're using generic courses, not ones that are designed in response to specific instructional needs. So now we need to look at whether or not those minutes that are spent in ILS, because we did have, a quarter of our students, to a half of our students spending the appropriate number of minutes, are we getting an effect in those minutes? So we did what we call a correlation analysis, and it's based on a scatter plot. A good scatter plot is one where the data points are clustered together in some sort of directional line. This scatter plot that I'm showing you right now is a highly correlated scatter plot. You can see that the dots are clustered at the lower left and at the upper right, and because of that clustering, we can assume that there's some type of relationship between those two data points. One of the numbers that we use to measure the correlation is the R-squared statistic, and it represents the proportion of variance explained by the other variable. In this case, the R-squared is, about 50%. What we're looking for in order to say that there's a meaningful relationship is an R-squared of about 0.25. Typically, if we see an R-squared of 0.25 or higher, then we can say, yep, these two things are related. We can explore this and make sure that, we can see what's going on between these two variables. So one of the things that we wanted to look at, like I said earlier, was the number of ILS minutes that students are using and their CRT scores. So we looked at a gain score on their CRTs. It's a normative gain where we look at last year's CRT scores and this year's CRT scores and how they compare relative to the population. And this is the scatter plot data. The blue dots represent students that did not have the full ILS experience, and the green dots represent the students who did. And so you can see, because of the way that these data are clustered, that there's not a linear relationship. On the lower left portion of the graph, we have a lot of students down there, and those represent students who had low numbers of ILS minutes and low gains in their CRT. On the top left of our graph, we have students who have low numbers of ILS minutes and high gains on their CRTs. Because these data are clustered kind of in a cloud and not in some type of linear relationship type of pattern, we conclude that there's probably not a relationship between the number of minutes that students are spending in ILS and their gains on CRT scores. The effect size on that is actually, the R-squared is 0.0004, which is way, way below the standard of 0.25 that we're looking at for a relationship. And so the conclusion that we make is that the length of time a student spends in ILS has essentially no effect on their outcomes on CRT scores. And so, I've spoken with a lot of principals and a lot of teachers and coaches, and they've said, yeah, but it's different at our school. Our schools uses ILS differently than other schools do, and that's true. Every school does something different with ILS. But we wanted to look and see, if we looked at patterns across schools, are we seeing some type of relationship that indicates that some schools are experiencing more of a benefit from ILS than others? And so this scatter plot that you're looking at, each dot represents a school. And on the x-axis is the average number of minutes in ILS for that school. And the y-axis is the average CRT gains for that school. So you can see that there's a dot right there on the top left. That dot is the school among the schools that are in this graph that had the lowest number of ILS minutes because it's the farthest left. It's also the second dot from the top, which means that it had the highest gains in CRT scores. So a school with really low ILS minutes and really high gains. You'll see down at the bottom, we have a school with really high ILS minutes, about the third or fourth highest ILS minutes that happens to be the lowest gaining on the CRTs. And because there's no pattern, no relationship between these two variables, R squared is 0.0009, again, very, very small. We conclude that even at the school level, when we look at individual schools, we're not seeing individual schools experiencing a different effect from ILS. Now, there is a difference in the way schools are gaining, but it's probably due to some other factor other than ILS because there's no evidence to support that. One of the other things that I hear often is ILS has an internal measure, and it indicates whether or not students are gaining at appropriate levels within the system. So you'll see a score that says a student gained 2 grade levels in ILS reading this year, or something like that. That internal metric is validated, and it's a good measure within ILS, but it doesn't have any relationship with the external measures that we really care about in our school district, or at least the ones to which we're held accountable. We're held accountable to our CRT scores and our writing scores and some of those other indicators that are standardized measures. We're not really held accountable for the internal ILS measures, and this scatter plot illustrates the difference, that there's no relationship between those internal metrics in ILS and the external measure of the CRTs. Internal metrics is on the x-axis and the CRT gains is on the y-axis. And our R squared, again, is very small. So what this says to me here is that the internal measures that ILS uses, though they show growth within ILS, they're not related in any way statistically to the growth measures that we use external to ILS. And so we can't use them as evidence in support of continuing a contract with ILS because the only thing they measure is success within the program, not some external measure. The last thing we did, just to make sure, I wanted this to be more than just a correlational analysis, and so we did what we call a t-test, which it takes 2 groups of students and it separates them into 2 piles and it looks at their averages. This graph right here is a summary of those averages. On the right-hand side, you see the average CRT gains for students who experience the full ILS number of minutes. So this is the group of full students. And on the left is the students who were either non-ILS or partial ILS students who didn't experience all of ILS. The bars represent a 95% confidence interval. So essentially, I'm 95% confident that if I randomly select a student from my full ILS group, they're going to score somewhere between negative 0.005 and positive 0.015, something like that. The question in a t-test is, if I randomly select a student from this group, would I predict that their score is different from a randomly selected student in this group? And in this case, because my bars overlap, I'm not confident that that's happening. So I can't really say, in fact, I'm saying right here with this t-test that there's no statistical difference in CRT gains between my full ILS students and my non or partial ILS students. When we look at our other indicator of implementation, which is whether or not students are enrolled in a custom course, that's another important thing to look at. We see something that's just a little bit different here. Because there's such a few number of students in in custom courses in ILS, our confidence interval is relatively large. And because there's so many students in our generic courses, that our confidence interval is relatively small. That's one of the rules of large numbers in statistics. And so there is a statistical difference between these two groups. If I randomly select a student from a generic course, I would expect that their scores are going to be lower than a student in a custom course, which means that the custom course has an effect on student achievement in a way that's different from a student who was enrolled in a generic course. So there is that statistical difference, but the next and most important question is how big is that statistical difference? So we want to look at effect size. And an effect size in this case ended up being about 0.03 scaled score points. Now on a CRT, our scaled scores range from 130 to 199, with a 130 being minimal and a 199 being maximal. And 160 is the mark for proficiency. So what this says is there is a difference between students in custom courses and generic courses, but that difference is is extremely small actually. It's 0.03 scaled score points, 3/100ths of a scaled score point. So the statistical conclusion is that I would expect students in a custom ILS course to score 3/100ths of a point higher than students who were in generic courses, which in terms of our CRT scores is nominal. I mean, that's an effect that's not, I mean, that happens, we see randomness account for score changes of 1 to 2 points. And so it's so much smaller than even what we would expect from just the nature of students going from year to year that we can't say that there's any kind of effect in ILS. And so I presented these conclusions to the Technology Steering Committee for the school district, and they made the determination to not renew the contract for ILS this year, to save those $300,000, which in a tight budget time is very beneficial as we look at the district bottom line, because of the program effect. Now, as a district, we're committed to learning first. We're committed to doing everything that we can do that will maximize students' opportunity to learn and achieve those essential standards that have been identified. Because ILS hasn't demonstrated any evidence of being able to achieve those means, they've decided to, not renew the contract. And so hopefully this little explanation has helped to understand the nature of the decision and what was looked at. It was a very well thought out and careful look that involved, many more minds than just one. And these data are just a few little helps so that you can understand why we made the decision.
So you may be asking yourself at this point, if not ILS, then what? We've heard about scatter plots, we've heard about gain scores, CRTs, but if we don't have ILS, then what are we going to do? Well, we know that we really need to be focusing on learning first. And so in order to focus on learning first, we have to start teaching in a different way. So we're not trying to substitute ILS with another program. Instead, we're trying to substitute it with having students become digital citizens, having them create, research, problem solve, become critical thinkers. And in doing this, we now will open up that time in the computer labs that will allow for this to happen. We've heard from teachers over and over about how they don't have enough time in the computer labs, how they would really love to be able to teach their kids these national standards with technology, but there just isn't the time or the access to the technology that is needed. We're hoping that we will not only save the district $300,000, but we will also be able to provide more access to technology for our students and have them become better prepared for 21st century learning, which is so necessary in today's market. Some of you might be asking, what do we do with small group instruction? Having technology in the computer labs, you'll still be able to do the same kind of small group instruction that you've done before, but now you'll be doing different things with the students. There are still a variety of resources available so that our students will learn and be able to know what to do. Those things include accessing our digital curriculum, and part of that is on the Digital Connections website. We also have various technology resources on our desk website as well. If you go through on Digital Connections and click on Sites and More Sites, there's some curriculum alignment that students will be able to access. By accessing the Digital Connections website, there will be a variety of resources available for teachers to be able to use. Please let your teachers know that these resources are available and that more will be coming soon. The last thing to know about ILS is that come July 31st, that will be the last time students will be able to access it. We wanted to make sure that it was still in use for summer for those of you that had planned on using it for summer school. So July 31st is the date where you should be able to access all of the information and make sure you have a printed copy if you're going to be using it in the future. We appreciate all that you do for the students. We know that this is complex. We know that many of you are excited about this opportunity to use computer labs in a different way, and some of you may have been counting on it. Please let us know how we can help you in this transition to teaching our students more of the 21st century skills they'll be needed in the future.